Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to go over the postural analysis for your STOTT Pilates exam. There's going to be two parts to the postural analysis series. The first part is going to cover tips to get you started and the side view. The second video will go over the front and back view of the body in the postural analysis. Before you start on a postural analysis of anyone, make sure you know the skeletal system. When you're analyzing someone's posture, there's going to be references to those bones. I mentioned this in a previous video, but learning the bones of the body is pretty simple. You could probably do it in a day. The reason you need to know these bones is because your posture comes from how your muscles pull on your bones. Your postural analysis guide and your Bony landmark reference guide both have references to different parts of your skeleton. You will not be able to understand the postural analysis if you don't know the bones of the skeleton. The next thing you need to know are the muscles from your muscular references section in your support material book on page 75. Again, the way your muscles pull on your bones is what gives you your posture. Knowing which muscles are short and tight versus long and loose will help you to understand the postural analysis of the body. Starting at the very beginning on page 3 is a ton of information that you are going to need to know in order to understand how to do the postural analysis and what the postural analysis is for. Read through it, highlight it, know it frontwards and backwards. If you're not training through STOTT Pilates, you can still access this information. This specific section was reprinted with permission from a book called Muscles, Testing and Function, 4th edition. I will leave links to both of these below. The information in this part of the book goes over muscle balance and how your muscles pull on your bones. If your muscles pull too far in one direction, it's gonna give you imbalance in your skeleton. This section tells you exactly what you should be looking for in different joints and parts of the body. It explains how to use the plumb line in order to analyze the posture. It's going to explain which muscles and muscle groups are pulling against each other or opposing each other in order to give the posture that you see. It's going to explain ideal alignment in the body and which muscles might be contributing to imbalances in the body and how they're contributing to imbalance in the body. Do not skip this part. Page 18 and 19 is where you can find the postural analysis guide and the Bony landmark reference guide. I also found a copy online, which I will leave linked below. I recommend having multiple copies of these printed out so you can mark them every single time you do a postural analysis. You are going to want to practice doing a postural analysis as many times as possible on as many bodies as possible. You're also going to need to know the terms that are on page 74 of your anatomical references. I made a video that goes into more specific detail on these anatomical terms and references if you'd like to check it out. If you have taken the STOTT Matwork or Reformer courses, you can go back and audit the postural analysis of those courses. Reach out to your training centers and see what dates they're offering those courses again. They will let you know which day they are doing the postural analysis. I observed it 3 or 4 times in order to understand it better. And I practiced with a group of other student instructors, which really helped me to nail down the postural analysis. So you're also going to have to learn the Bony landmarks that we need for your postural analysis. These Bony landmarks are actually listed within the Bony landmark reference guide. Truthfully, I learned these Bony landmarks as I was practicing the postural analysis with other student instructors. But it might be a good idea for you to just skim the Bony landmarks references and highlight the Bony landmarks and look up what they are. These are the Bony landmarks that you will need to know for your postural analysis. There's the lateral malleolus, the greater trochanter, the ASIS, the PSIS, the midpoint of the iliac crest, the acromion process, the calcaneal tendons, the femoral epicondyles, the inferior angle of the scapula, the superior angle of the scapula, the medial border of the scapula, the spinous process, and the olecranon process. Feel free to screenshot this and compare it to the bony landmarks that you found in your sheet. Now let's talk about what exactly is posture. According to our support material, posture is a composite of all the positions of all the joints of the body at any given moment. And static postural alignment is best described in terms of the positions of the various joints and body segments. Posture may be described also in terms of muscle balance. I mentioned this earlier, but essentially how your muscles pull on your bones is what's giving you your posture. There is a bit more to it, like how your bones have grown, but for our purposes as Pilates instructors, when we're doing our postural analysis and creating programs for clients, this is what we're paying attention to. Ideal skeletal alignment involves a minimal amount of stress and strain and is conducive to maximal efficiency of the body. So for those of you familiar with or working through the Balanced Body program or Balanced Body equipment, you may see where they might have gotten the name from. In standard posture, the spine presents the normal curves and the bones of the lower extremities are in ideal alignment for weight bearing. The neutral position of the pelvis is conducive to good alignment of the abdomen and trunk and that of the extremities below. The chest and upper back are in a position that favors optimal function of the respiratory organs. The head is erect in a well-balanced position that minimizes stress on the neck musculature. There's quite a bit more to this, but this is the basic understanding of posture. You can find more information about postural deviations from standard in your support materials or the Muscles, Testing, and Functions book. So if you took STOTT, Matwork, or Reformer, we used a plumb line as a point of reference to compare our joints and bony landmarks to determine that postural alignment of our client. And we were looking for deviations from that plumb line in order to determine the posture of that client. When practicing, I just used an imaginary plumb line. There are 4 different types of posture that we're going to be on the lookout for. There's ideal alignment, which is the alignment that we highlighted earlier in this video where the muscles are pulling evenly. There's kyphosis lordosis, which is an excessive curvature in the lower back and the upper back. There's flat back and sway back. Again, your book is going to go into much more deeper detail in what these 4 different postures look like. Make sure that you understand the differences between these 4 different postures, because when you do your exam, you'll have to create a program based on the postural analysis for your test body. Now let's get started with the side view. You are going to have your practice client stand up and start to go through your postural analysis guide using your Bony landmark reference sheet. I never bought a plumb line, so I just used an imaginary plumb line. Looking at our PA guide, we're going to start at the very bottom and have a view of the ankle joints. Our Bony landmark guide says to examine the ankle of the ankle joint created by the front of the shin and the foot. Determine if the ankle joint is neutral, plantar flexed, or dorsiflexed. This is why we need to know the definitions of those anatomical references. Once you've made your determination, you'll mark that on the postural analysis checklist and then move down to the next part. Make sure you go down the list on one side of the body and then have the client turn around and do the other side. Next up is the knee joint. That's going to be a little bit more tricky. If we look at our Bony landmark reference guide, it's going to tell us to use the greater trochanter and anterior to the lateral malleolus and relate that to the plumb line. From there, we can determine if the knees are neutral, hyperextended, or flexed. So the first thing we need to do is palpitate the greater trochanter. To palpitate the greater trochanter, you want to place your hand on your client's hip. Have them go onto the ball of the foot of that same side and twist their foot from side to side like they're putting out a cigarette. You will feel the top of that thigh bone rotating in that hip joint, and that's your greater trochanter. To find the lateral malleolus, it's much easier. It's just the bony part of that ankle joint on the side. Once you've found those two bony landmarks, you want to draw a line from the greater trochanter to the lateral malleolus, and you're going to determine if that knee is forwards of the plumb line, which would make the knee flexed, or behind the plumb line, which would make the knee hyperextended, or neither, which would be neutral. And then we would just mark that down and move on. Next up is going to be the hips. This is a lot more complicated. It honestly makes more sense to do the pelvis first because we have to find the pelvic alignment in order to determine hip alignment, but the hip does come first, so that's what we're going to do. For reference, your pelvis consists of the sacrum, coccyx, and the hip bones. And the hip bones are technically three bones fused together: the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. Now, on your hip bones, we need to find the ASIS, the anterior superior iliac spine, and the PSIS, the posterior superior iliac spine. To find them, we just palpitate the very front of the hip bone. It's going to be that very bumpy part at the front. And then the back of the hip bone. It's usually those little dimples on the back. From there, we can find the midpoint of the iliac crest. So if we draw our hands up the top of that hip bone, we're going to find the midpoint of the iliac crest. Once we find that midpoint of the iliac crest, we're going to compare that to the greater trochanter, which we found when we were looking at the knees. Again, you're going to have your client bend their knee, turn on the ball of their foot like they're squishing a bug or putting out a cigarette, and then we'll find that greater trochanter turning from side to side inside that hip joint. Now we're going to compare the midpoint of the iliac crest to the greater trochanter. If those bony landmarks are right on top of each other, then the hip joint is neutral. However, if those bony landmarks are in front of or behind each other, then you have a pelvic tilt. If the midpoint of the iliac crest is forwards or anterior of the greater trochanter, then the hip joint is flexed. If the midpoint of the iliac crest is behind or posterior of the greater trochanter, then the hip joint is extended. An extended or flexed hip is telling you a lot about the muscle balance that's going on in the hip joints. Often, flexed hip joints means short or tight hip flexors, potentially long hamstrings, glutes, and erector spinae. And extended hip joints will mean the opposite, but not always. There are other things going on in a person's body that we as instructors aren't able to determine. However, for your exam, you need to pick exercises that will encourage better alignment for your exam client. Next up is the pelvis. Now, this is going to be a lot easier because we've already done it. All you need to do is find the ASIS and the PSIS and compare the two. If the ASIS is lower than the PSIS, then you have an anterior pelvic tilt. If the PSIS is lower than the ASIS, then you have a posterior pelvic tilt. Women or clients that can give birth are going to have a little bit more of an anterior pelvic tilt. In my course, we were taught roughly the width of a finger. And next thing we're going to look at is the spine. So we are looking at the three sections of the spine: the lumbar, the thoracic, and the cervical. In ideal alignment, your spine has a natural slight S curve with concave and convex curvatures. Concave or convex forwards means hollowed out or rounded inward, like a cave. You will find concave curvatures in the cervical and lumbar spine. Convex means curved or rounded outward. And you will find this in the thoracic and sacrum sections of the spine. Some anatomy books refer to concave as convex forwards and convex as convex backward. We're going to look at and palpitate the back of the spine. Starting at the lumbar spine, then the lower thoracic spine, then the upper thoracic spine, and finally the cervical spine. The lumbar spine should be slightly convexed anteriorly or concaved. The thoracic spine should be slightly convex posteriorly. The cervical spine should be slightly convex anteriorly or concave. Deviations in the spinal alignment is going to either show us that kyphosis lordosis posture, that flat back posture, or that sway back posture. Again, finding these deviations might tell us a lot about the muscle imbalance in our clients' bodies. For example, if somebody is kyphosis lordosis, this could mean that they have short or tight neck extensors and hip flexors, and long or weak neck flexors, upper back, erector spinae, and potentially external obliques. Again, during your postural analysis in your exam, when you discover these imbalances, you're going to want to choose exercises from the STOTT Pilates repertoire that will counteract these imbalances and encourage better alignment. And for STOTT Pilates, the exercises have to go in order. The last thing we're going to look at from the side is the head. We're going to look at the auditory meatus and the acromion process and compare the two. Drawing a line, we want to see if the head is either shifted forwards, retracted, or neutral. And so this is the end of part 1 of the postural analysis video series. I will be uploading part 2, which will include the front and the back view. Make sure you're subscribed so that you can catch it when it releases. Please feel free to drop any comments and ask any questions. And if you're familiar with doing the postural analysis, I am more than happy for you to add your input. My goal has always been for this channel to be a resource for Pilates instructors to help each other. As instructors, we are always learning. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next video.